panelists who are leaders in the community, working to ensure that the younger generations that will come will never have to face 9/11, anything like 9/11 again. So tonight we are going to be asking some questions that we believe may be that may bring some answers to our community. I thank you so much for coming out here in this rainy day to be part of this event. Without further ado, we're gonna go. We're gonna introduce Pastor Franklin, who will start with a word of prayer.
Right. What's good, everybody? How's everybody doing? Everybody's good. Good. It's good to see everybody, man. We're just going to just take one moment of prayer as we begin and start this session on tonight. So let's pray. Father God, we just want to say thank you, God, once again for another day's journey. God, we thank you for this event. We thank you for the panel on tonight. We ask, oh God, that you will be in the midst. We ask that you will be in the format of questioning, oh God, that is necessary and needed, oh God, for such a time as this. We ask for you to just allow the presence, oh God, to be of great liberation, oh God. That if somebody desires to speak tonight, God, they will know exactly what it is they need to say. Maybe answers, oh God, that could be answered on tonight throughout the concept of this panel. We ask, oh God, that you will be a part of this tonight. You're the only one, oh God, that we know, God, that can bring clarity to this world, to this nation, and better yet, to this community here in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and abroad. Father, we pray right now, God, for this event. We pray for everyone that's here, and we ask all these blessings right now. In your son, Jesus' name, we do pray. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Franklin. Pastor Franklin, would you mind introducing our panelists, please?
So tonight we have a great panel here tonight to discuss some of the things that took place after 9/11. We're going to start with Mr. Orlando Torres. Mr. Orlando Torres is a managing director for Outreach and Racial Justice for the Community Relations Bureau of New York City Commission on Human Rights. Orlando coordinates the citywide outreach and education on the agencies, is always looking to build relationships with community partners to spread awareness on city human rights law. Previously, Orlando serves as the director of the Bronx Community Service Center for CCHR. Orlando has a master's degree in public administration from the Mark School of Public and International Affairs at Baruch College. On his downtime, he enjoys spending time with his son and dog in their apartment. Orlando Torres is a managing director, Mr. Eric Waterman, born and raised in Brooklyn to his lovely wife, Monique Chandler Waterman, for over 22 years. They have 4 magnificent children. Our Eric Waterman has a background in education for over 18 years with the New York City Department of Education, high school football coach and mentor. Eric is a passionate about the mission of community development funding with East Flatbush Village, Inc., a nonprofit organization that provides wraparound services for families and offers children of all ages recreational activities and educational support to build strong foundations and greater self-esteem. Development of the community has to start with our youth and bring resources and access to the communities that don't have or are not available for at-risk. Eric helps found the EFV over 15 years ago with a focus on gang and gun violence prevention, and currently serves as the executive director. Reverend Dr. Terry Lee was born and raised in Cowley, Jamaica, where he attended school and worked in construction. In 1989, he moved to New York and joined a construction company while spreading the gospel between assignments on buses, trains, and anywhere he could find people. That was the beginning of his street ministry. When he headed to call of the Lord and enter the ministry on a full-time basis. In fact, he is known as a man with the church on wheels, referring to his mobile truck. The church on wheels traveled throughout the 5 boroughs, teaching and spreading the gospel to many. He boldly volunteers at Ground Zero after 9/11 attacks. Mr. David Lewis. Mr. David Lewis is a problem solver, critical thinker, and a community organizer in the lifelong residents of Brooklyn, New York. Currently, David serves as a deputy commissioner of the Community Partnerships and Engagement at the Mayor Community Affairs Unit. In this role, David oversees partnerships and community-based organizations, stakeholders, ethnic leaders, leveraging city resources to ensure an equitable New York for all. David has over 14 years experience in community development, ranging from operations management to policy and program development. David holds a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology from the University at Buffalo and a Master's in Public Policy and Administration from Northwestern University. Mr. Tyrone Stern. Straight out of Brooklyn, Tyrone Stern is a young, unapologetic African-American community advocate. He currently serves as a community engagement liaison with the 67th Precinct Clergy Council, the God Squad, standing firm on saying, with unity, there is always community. His main goal is to unify the community through extracurricular activities and events, food drives, conversations between constituents, elected officials, and authority figures, and making everyone feel equal. Seeing this spiraling lack in the local community with respect to resources for low-income families, Tyrone realizes the need for better. In his formative years, there were years around basketball, step, and dance programs for constituents of all ages. Currently, the decline in resources where children and seniors hunger for some type of programming has prompted him into action, to be a part of the solution and not the problem. Tyrone partners with the members of the community to host annual summer basketball competitions, weekly food drives, and seek not just to support the 90s, but the East Flatbush on a whole. He also is a part of the 58th Assembly District of Violence Prevention Task Force to help alleviate the tensions within the community. In his spare time, Tyrone enjoys singing, mentoring students, and just being a good neighbor and a big brother. In the community, Tyrone gives credit to God, who is the source for everything he has, and he aspires to expand his work across the New York City. At this time, let's give us a hand to all of our panelists on this evening.
Thank you, Pastor Franklin. 9/11 is one of the rarest days in the United States. There were a total of 2,753 people that lost their lives that day. A number of 343 firefighters and paramedics were killed, and a total of 23 police officers that lost their lives. And during that tragic moment, many people were in different areas doing different things. But till this day, we understand that people who were there still remember that tragic day and still have a they were doing, where they were at that moment, and the person that they first called. So tonight I would like to know who was the first person you called? What were the first things going through your heads? And how did you feel, and what were you actually doing during that time?
Okay. Sure, I'll start. How did I feel? Well, I'll start with just the experience of the fact that I had family, and everybody here probably knows somebody who's been impacted by 9/11 in some way, shape, fashion, or form, who either worked in the area, lived in the area, commuted in that area. I, of course, had people in that regard. My mother at the time worked downtown Brooklyn. My brother didn't work in the area but was caught in transit on the way. But I actually worked, and my wife worked in the building right behind World Trade Center 7, and one of the wheels from the plane actually hit the building that we would have been in, but we weren't there because we actually had we were on maternity leave with the birth of my now 22-year-old, so she was born 2 days later, and so. My first call, to answer your question, of course, was to my mother and my brother. My father, who worked in the World Trade Center buildings, I think Building 2 on the 86th floor for years, but he had retired, but oftentimes would go there regularly because he worked for the Port Authority. And so I made all of those calls to, but the concern, of course, was directly with family initially.
I'll never forget 9/11 because I was a freshman in college, and I went to Hunter College, and so I wasn't in class at the time, but I was working in my job that happened to be in the college. I was an archivist for the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, and they had us all the way on the 16th floor of the North Building, so I could see the smoke from the buildings, all the way downtown. I had no idea what was going on. We just thought it was a big fire at that point. I guess my first call was probably to my girlfriend at the time, who was in class, and we were trying to figure out, if there was going to be classes. I wound up getting her on the last A train to go back into Brooklyn before they cut the trains off, and I had to walk back home to the Bronx. So, yeah, that's what I remember. It was a crazy time. I think the aftermath of it is what impacted all of us here in New York a lot, on top of the devastation of the actual events.
Okay, thank you. Question is very personal, I know, especially to Pastor Terry Lee. As a pastor, during the time there were firefighters, law enforcement officers running to the World Trade Center, rescuing hundreds of people, and a lot of other people who served the city went out to volunteer after everything happened. And as a pastor in our community, what gave you the drive to be there, to volunteer, to ensure that Americans were okay? And as an immigrant, that what gave you the energy, the drive, the enthusiasm to go on ground zero as one of our heroes without, the diploma or whatever that, everybody had? What gave you the drive to be there as a pastor?
Well, certainly, we, as a pastor here since 1989, I've been out there in the street doing a lot of community engagement, police and community. That's always one of my strongest area of engagement, where conflict, rioting, shooting, we're always there. The Adler Weimer incident here in 7-0 precincts, few block away from here, out there engaging with police and community. So we have been building a strong bond with the NYPD, and I have been serving also as a clergy liaison, the 7-1 precincts during that time. And of course, when at the time too, I was undocumented, never have any green card, no business card, not even Metro card. But then it was token, But as an undocumented immigrant, and see, watching the news and see, people, was running to ground zero, and hearing police died, firefighter died. My compassion as a minister, and as a human being, it kicks in, and I couldn't stay still. So being a police clergy, liaison. I have my ID from the NYPD, so that give me access to Ground Zero. And a couple of weeks later, the mayor office, Giuliani, they set up New York City clergy crisis respond team, and under the partnership with OEM, which is a federal Office of Emergency Management at the time, and they, certified me to also be there. So they give me the red jacket, the hats, the gloves, and so with my OEM ID from the city and my NYPD ID, full access. So I was there in the morgue, blessing body parts. I was on the pile. I spent, months and months at Ground Zero, just to be there and helping police and firefighter and helping families
Wow.
coming out of the rubble.
Thank you so much, Pastor Terry, for all the services that you rendered to our city during that time. It goes beyond things, because I thought you were just there. I didn't know you were going to the morgue and doing all of that. So it's a blessing for us to have immigrants like you in this great city. Okay. During 9/11, millions of American children were in classrooms that morning. It was actually the beginning of the school year. So when the hijackers hit the World Trade Center, the president, then President Bush, he was actually in a classroom in Florida with students, and his chief of staff told him, whispered in his ears, "America is under attack." So this day was a traumatic day for both educators, students, and parents. What has been put in place to help secure that our students are protected under such tragedies? And as a parent and as parents, do you think more could have been done, or more should be done in securing our students?
So I guess, like, as you speak it, you of course would relive it. I was still a student in college, with a child on the way, so it changes your mindset, knowing that she would be born soon, within pretty much that week, 2 days later. But even the aftermath, as was said afterwards or a little earlier, your mindset of just the world looked different, right? You had went and exposed to a trauma and experienced a trauma that impacted everybody on different levels. And of course, right away we think of youth, and I know we think through the lens of like hate and the trauma of that. And when you go through something that is, I guess, earth-shattering, even if you experienced it from afar, you didn't have to. You could also, relate to people who were down there and dedicating their time, energy, and service to making sure they're supporting their community, their country, whether it be at the site and dealing with the rubble, or outside of that and just trying to make sure that the trauma that was existing or developing at that moment, people were supported in many different ways. What I remember is the chaos of people not knowing. What's the unknown? There were people who just didn't know where their family members were. People were walking across the bridge or stuck in the train, in the subway system. And so that trauma is something that if you went through it, you won't forget it, right? You lived it, you won't forget it. And so in terms, to answer your question around supporting our community members, and particularly our youth, those that have gone through it, our youth pretty much now are adults that have gone through that experience. But to make sure that they're supported, right? That they don't, that the trauma that they had from that is seen something that can be assisted through, meaning whether it be counseling or whether it be opportunities to be able to have forums like this and speak through what has been a challenge for them in that time frame. Speak and have conversations with family members that had that trauma as well and went through that experience. But I would also say to current youth, we hope that they don't have to go through an experience of that nature, of that severe trauma. But to also, we kind of are preparing them, unfortunately, because we have a lot of shelter-in systems that's taking place in schools. I'm sure most kids have gone through that. We are dealing with it as adults, whether it be in those professional spaces as well. And it stems from crisis like 9/11. But my suggestion is that in order to do more is just having the conversation around how to, one, protect one another in these spaces, how to deal and manage with crisis, but also deal with the mental trauma that comes with it.
Yeah, I believe that even now, as you rightly said, Mr. Eric, that young kids who were there, and even young kids today who heard of 9/11, and they still watch it online, still see clipping, hearing of people who are still dying, even when just a day or two ago, 2 more firefighter, died. So their kids also have been, traumatized, and the whole world, who really watched that, and it's still living on with it.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to share a story which I found was very interesting online. It was about a little girl that her father had died. She was actually like 3, and her name was Laurel. She was traumatized by the tragedies of her father's death, and she explained that the way her mother explained to her how her father died was that she basically told her that a bad man was on the plane, and your dad is gone because of that. So for that reason, she grew up, she said, so then it basically made me terrified of all men, including family members, strangers, everybody. So when we hear a story like that with a child that loses their father, and the way that the mother tells the story is just saying, it was a bad man, and the trauma goes beyond where she feels that it's not the fact that it's a man, that it automatically she puts away every man in her life. So as parents, how do we explain what happened at 9/11 to our children so that they can have an understanding and a mind that is open, not to, make things worse for them mentally?
Yeah, sure. I got the wrong seat because everything goes through me this way, but it's okay. So to speak to that particular situation, again, with the lens and through the lens of hate and how we can defeat and reduce hate in our community. We're not born hateful. Right? Nobody's born hateful. That doesn't happen. Our experiences, our traumas, and what we're taught leads us to, a hateful mindset and or approach to either people and or situations. And so in that situation, the young lady something was articulated to her in a way that maybe she wasn't able to really conceptualize yet and put in the text in a space that it was where she can apply it just to that specific situation. But we all go through trauma. I mean, number one thing I remember as an adult is getting on the plane after 9/11, having to fly someplace. And, we heard the stories of what took place on the plane and the fight or the lack thereof, depending on the circumstance and the situation. And everybody came in with like a plan, a mindset. Even to this day, when I walk on the plane, you pay attention to everything, every little detail, every person, everything, because that was something that was ingrained in you based on the experience that we all fortunately lived through. But I know it was a trauma, and so if that's happened to us as adults, we have to assume that with children it's going to be even more impactful and a little bit more challenging for them to absorb it. So being able to have children can actually handle a lot more than we give credit. We need to give more information, more context. We have to be sensitive to the way in which they are going to articulate that information, the way they absorb that information. But it's important that we have conversations with context to be able to break everything down, so they won't necessarily have to stream off into their own imagination on what actually took place. So then they don't apply it in that situation. Every man was then hated upon by that young girl. And that's not just in this situation, but in most spaces that be the case, that we are very articulate with our children to make sure that they can apply it accordingly.
Just like to expand on a great point that my colleague made here about children being able to handle information as long as it's delivered to them, responsibly, and in a way that they can understand, right? Not too complicated, obviously. I wholeheartedly believe that. And I do think that's even more important now, maybe than it even was then. Because now, we didn't have social media in 9/11, right? This is a different time now, and children are on social media, whether we like it or not. They're going to get some kind of information. So let's make sure that they're getting the information that they most respect and understand from us, right? So that they can put everything else that they're going to get into context whenever it comes to these really devastating or tragic events, or even just events that are all over the place, all over the news that everyone's talking about. It's important that we communicate with them, I think, consistently, and tell them what we think about it. Right? Because they are going to put more weight on what we say than anything or anyone else. So I could tell you that as a father, I do believe it.
Well, at the time, my daughter, she was just 6 years old, Now she's 28. So it was scary for her, and just coming home with all my helmet, my clothes, and sometimes it's rain. Like it's raining now. You have all those boots, and the debris is coming on. And just, not even, even thinking that coming home, later on, dying from the debris. So it not only just affect a lot of the people who were literally workers, the police, the firefighters, and volunteers. And one of the things I see that with 9/11, thank God for the police and the firefighters, but the city they really don't think of the volunteers who were there also working. They don't really speak much about, volunteer. And, I believe some of these things affect our children. So we have to let our kids know that though they were act of men, but, people carry out evil act, both male and female. And we have to guide them so they don't live with this about men are just evil, so we have to, get that to them, not only just point out that, the terrorist act was just an act of man, but people. And I think that would help to divert their mind from just thinking of all men or evildoers.
Okay. Thank you, Pastor Terry Lee. All right, so this question's, I hope, I get other people to join in on this. The Civil Rights Division, the Federal Bureau Investigation of the United States, and the United States Attorney Office have investigated over 800 incidents since 9/11 involving violence, threat, vandalism against Arab Americans, Muslims, etc., and other individuals in the Middle Eastern. The incidents have consisted of telephone, internet, mail, face-to-face threats, minor assaults, etc. Some getting to life-threatening situations. In Minneapolis, there was a man who testified that he was guilty on August 10, 2011. A former employee of the TSA, his name is George Thompson. He pleaded guilty to federal hate crime charges for assaulting an elderly Somali man in May 2010. Thompson admitted that he assaulted the man because he believed he was Muslim, because he believed he was Muslim and Somali, and that he yelled at the victim during the assault that he needs to go back to Africa. Why do we believe that people display these violent actions after such events happen? We can make a quick example of what happened for those that were not there in 9/11, but even as close as COVID-19, where we saw the amount of hate against Asians. There was also a situation where HIV/AIDS was said to have been Haitians that had HIV, that came with HIV/AIDS, and all of a sudden Haitian people were, the target for hate in the city. Where have we learned these things? Why do we choose violence before conversations? Why do we seek vengeance before investigations? Who are we to blame, and where have we learned these things, and what are we doing so that we communicate rather than fight? What are the interventions being done in our city to get people together, to sit down, to talk instead of fighting, to get to know one another?
I can tag in. I can't recall all the questions, but I'm going to try my best to address what I can recall. I think one of the questions was, where are people learning this from? And frankly, I think the answer is they're not learning, period. I think there is just ignorance out there. And so when people are not educating themselves, or they're not finding the proper tools to receive the education about an illness, a circumstance, an occurrence in a community, whatever it is, then they're left to their own devices, and they're left to make things up in their mind, or they allow folks who also are either ignorant or do not have the tools to educate themselves about something, or maybe they just refuse to educate themselves about something, share misinformation, and then that just creates a wave of misinformation that gets spread out throughout a person, to a neighborhood, to a community, and it causes issues for everybody. And I think one of the major driving forces that forces the miseducation to be spread is fear. And so when people are afraid of something and they're not really understanding the source or where something is coming from, when you add fear and ignorance together, it's just it's a recipe for disaster, really. And so using COVID-19 as an example, when folks were just, targeting Asians, Asian Americans here across the city, because they believe that for some reason that the Asian community was bringing in the virus. It was not okay. 2, it was inaccurate. It was wrong. But yet, those who believed that, they were frankly the minority doing that. But still, you would see instances of those occurrences taking place. And it was because they were afraid. It was because they didn't know. It was because they weren't educated. And using COVID again as an example, to spend almost 500 days where every day you'd get an update on what's happening about this one thing that literally shut down the entire country, the entire world. It really also had an impact on people's mental health and ability to really now separate the real versus the unreal, fact from fiction, because people were not able to, they were almost in a twilight zone, right? Like they were just seeing this information over and over and over again. I know that a lot of folks were impacted mentally because they didn't have the ability to get the proper mental health care that they needed. Many folks were living alone, so they didn't even have anybody there to really share their concerns with or speak. We are social beings. We were created to speak and to live in communities, and so if we're isolating ourselves, we're not doing anything to grow at all. And so once we're left alone to build our own thoughts, to have our own understanding of things without even finding somebody to bounce off this knowledge from and getting the right information, it really doesn't help us. It really hurts us. What are we doing to help? And so I will say that the mayor has the Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes. It's the acronym is OPHC, and the office is there to really do a couple of things. One, stop hate. Through whether it's trying to reduce as much misinformation as possible, also educating people, also providing resources for folks can get the right information about whatever information that they'd like to learn, particularly around a form of hate. The Office of Hate also provides communities, especially communities that deal a lot with incidents of hate crimes, the tools necessary to have either boots on the ground, to have resources virtually, but just resources to help really keep people from spreading hate and spreading that misinformation. The mayor also has an initiative called Breaking Bread and Building Bonds. His goal and is to have 1,000+ dinners across the city of New York, to have people from different walks of life to sit at the table, to speak to one another, to see one another face to face, so that they can share their walk with one another. And the idea here is that by the time that people leave these table discussions, that they would understand that more than anything, they're alike than they are different. More than anything, they share a common ground. More than anything, we are of the same people. We all come from the same place, yet just different backgrounds. So it doesn't make us too different from one another. We may have, one can live, the other comes from the Bronx, but yet still we're living in the city together, trying to. I think that means it's time for. We're living in the same city together, trying to support one another as we're going through our daily challenges every day, taking care of ourselves and our family. But I'm going to stop there.
Would it be okay if I followed up on that too? Because, I mentioned earlier I work for the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And so this is an agency that's almost 80 years old here in the city, created to address those exact questions, right? Why can't people living in the same city, maybe coming from different faiths or different countries or different races, why can't they get along? What can the city do to help them get along better, to get to know themselves, each other better? And so everything that David mentioned that the mayor is working on, whether it's breaking bread, building bonds, whether it's the Office of Preventing Hate Crime, we are working in close contact with in both of those programs to kind of make sure that people are aware of their human rights in this city, right? Because what our agency does is we enforce the city human rights law that protects against discrimination and harassment based on things like your faith, based on your nationality, based on your race, based on what language you speak. There are 27 different, almost 29, in November it will be 29, different categories like that called protected classes that the law protects us against discrimination based on these things. And so one of the things that we can do is be at events like this where we're building in community, which is vital to kind of stopping hate, right? And stopping people in their mind from thinking that anyone different from me is probably dangerous and I need to be ready to attack them, right? That's a fundamental ingredient to how we get to these events like 9/11. But what we also want to do is let people know their rights and kind of show them how they can protect themselves. So even with OPHC, we try to do as many bystander intervention trainings and workshops as possible. Literally having a couple hours to sit down with folks and teach them what strategies they can use when they're in the middle of a conflict, when they're seeing a conflict between two people where one might be attacking someone because of their faith, because of their nationality, things like that. What can you do if it's safe for you to prevent that from going too far? What can you do to distract someone who's upset about something, who may be accosting someone or attacking someone, to distract them and kind of calming them down, right? So these are the kind of workshops that our law wants to promote and wants to deliver to as many different communities as possible. So if anyone here is interested in something like that, let's please talk after this. And I'm sure that the folks online can get in touch with Children for Change, and we can figure out the contact stuff there.
I want to add one piece. Is David touched on is hate is fed through fear. We all have a fear of something, and so we tend to also put a label to that fear, whether that be an individual or something, whatever it might be. And with regards to 9/11, that fear became the symbol of a Muslim nation, right? It became that. With regards to COVID, it became through misinformation. I don't want to say it was accurate. The fear then became about an Asian nation or from China or things of that nature. That was misinformation. I say that to say, in reaction, you asked the question about violence, like why was our reaction to violence? First thing, human nature is you're going to self-preservation. So if you feel fearful of something and you need to react to it, the likelihood is you're going to react in a way that you feel appropriate to survive the situation, whatever that might be. If today everybody in this room, and there was an announcement there wasn't going to be any food ever, we're not going to eat ever again, we would go into a mental process that would go into self-preservation. How am I going to eat? How much water can I get in here because I can't dehydrate? Like, we would go through that process. And so the same can be said around gang violence. It's about fear, lack of resources. The same could be said, of course, as we articulated around biases, the lack of knowledge of something elevates the fear factor. If I don't, the less I know about somebody, the more fear I have based off of the biases that I already have in existence. If somebody walks in a room looking a certain way, and you have a fear based off of what you have mentally in your mind of what that person may look like and how that person might impact you, you might want to react that way. Mind you, it could be your brother or your sister, right? It could be somebody that you know and have an intimate knowledge or relationship with. And so I say that to say, fear is always that factor, and we have to break down those barriers with knowledge to reduce the fear, to be able to have an impact against hate.
Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, amazing. Yeah. It seems like you're going to be the preacher next, right? But after 9/11, we have also seen where, certain group, were targeted, because of their nationality, and all Muslims, people from the, sent in, never want to do anything with them. And even during the COVID-19, we have seen the same, play out, where if you are from China, or, you look Chinese, right? Asian, right? Even me, when they heard Mr. Lee, they thought I'm from China. So, but when they see, oh, no, he's a Jamaica China. We have seen that kind of role play, and especially in the line of Internation and Homeland Security. And civil liberty stepped in to really down that level of fear and discrimination. So I want to commend your civil liberty for what you guys do also.
Thank you, Pastor Terry. So as we look at 9/11, there comes, we earlier I said how many people died during 9/11. But the United States is facing everyday terror in our nation, in our cities, where violence amongst ourselves. This is not foreigners attacking us. This is us attacking each other. I went into a meeting once, and one thing that struck me, which is like you said, very important when we do have conferences and meetings like this, because we learn from each other. And I can recall just this one phrase that came from one of it was a pantry thing that they were doing, and this lady said, sometimes we don't even know who our neighbor. And as a Christian, I know that we speak about, loving our neighbors, but who really is our neighbors? And she continued to say that sometimes we fail to understand that the homeless person in our corner is our neighbor. We fail to understand that that gangster across the street is our neighbor. We fail to understand that, that child molested, or, we pick our neighbors as people who are close to us, people in our churches, and sometimes we forget, our neighbors are the people that you pass by and you probably never said hi to. So we're living in an era right now in the United States where violence is escalating. And in 2021, for the most recent study, data showed that 48,830 people died from gun-related injuries in the United States in just that year. So when if we were to compare, this is like 9/11 every month, every 2 weeks, every week in the United States of America. So, according to studies, 70% of New York residents are very, we would say 30% and somewhat at 40%, concerned that they will be targeted in a serious crime in the country. So, as this question, I would refer it to Tyrone, but anyone else can jump in at it, anyone who's serving, As a young man who has been affected by violence in your community, what path have you taken to ensure safety for you, your family, and your community? And what advice would you give to any young person who wants to see change in our community?
Testing. Greetings, everybody. So, with all respect to all faith traditions in here, I'm a full-time believer in God. So, she asked, what did I do? I kept my faith in God, and as a person with faith, I prayed and I still pray every day for my safety, my family's safety, and my community's safety. As you guys already heard, I have the privilege to help organize community-based events such as basketball tournaments, food pantries, and many more. And I did it a lot of times within the summertime where, the school is out and kids are free. And we know around them time, that is when the violence tend to increase. And let me just make sure I say this right. And honestly, with the violence tending to increase through the communities, we having the activities during them times help to denounce and ultimately lead safety in the community. And with that being said, I was able to work with the 67th Precinct Clergy Council, the God Squad, where I served as a community engagement liaison, and she asked what advice would I give to the youth. I tell everybody, be yourself. Don't let nobody tell you otherwise. One of my main things I get up and I always say when I'm speaking to people is, I'm a hood brother, but I'm a good brother. I found my lane and I stuck in it. And that's what I speak to all my youth. You got to continue to be yourself. Don't let nobody tell you otherwise. God Value yourself, love yourself, respect yourself. And when you do it, when you see doing that, you'll see that you value other people, you love other people, and you respect other people.
I'm a hood brother, but I'm a good brother. I like that. um, I want to add, I guess, so you asked the question of what we're, like, what are we doing in terms of, yeah. So, people think of violence and they think somebody was done wrong. That's part of it. People think of violence and they think, for every action there's a reaction. But we also have to think of it in a way that, again, is simplified. It really comes down to fear. Fear of, right? So I won't even say young people, but most people now, there's an opposition out there if it's from the gang perspective. And there's a fear based off of an action, and that there's going to then be a reaction. So people tend to try to be proactive in trying to respond or react in a violent way. But it's a taught behavior, right? Like if we didn't have guns, we'd teach somebody else how to use knives and be violent with that. But if we didn't have that, we'd be using our fists, because that throughout the evolution, that's what it was. So we are violent based off our reaction, because this is an emotional tie based off of the trauma or the fear or lack of knowledge, which we all have articulated up here. What have we done is to bring knowledge, right? We talked about having these events, but we also talked about engaging community members. Tyron hit the nail on the head. In particular in that area where I met Tyron in the 90s, doing that work is key, because we're able to connect with your neighbors. The key isn't just doing the event. It was the connection that we now had as neighbors, and realizing that we are living in the same area. We are going through a lot of the same experiences, good and or bad. And we want to see most of the time, owners want to see the best out of our community. Now, we might travel through different lanes to get to that, but ultimately we want to work together. Whether that person is an NYPD officer, whether that person is a community member, a pastor, a clergy in any way, serves the community through administrative offices, whatever it might be, whatever title you may hold or role you want to play, ultimately we are all community members, whether we live next door to each other or in another borough. Many of us are immigrants and or are first or second generation Americans here, so we tend to travel back home. And when we do that, we have another community there. And we bring a lot of the same culture and mindset here. We just experienced that through Labor Day. And everybody was worried about it being safe because of experiences and traumas that we've had and the fear of what has taken place in the past. But it was one of the safest Labor Days that we have had and parades that we have had. And that was, in my opinion, because of the work that we did to make sure, in many of the people, as a matter of fact, everybody who's up here on this panel served to make sure we had a safe Juve and make sure we had a safe parade. But we did that leading up to the event with community, with engagement, with activities, with outreach, with having these forums, meetings. So we're already doing it. We just need the platform to be more exposed, and we need to apply it in all spaces. And then I think that is the way in which we can reduce violence.
Also, it's, if we, talk about clean, like this white, towel, if you look at it and spots in it, there are certain things that you have to use to get the spot out, right? You can't use red paint, to move a spot. And you can use black. Really, get someone clean. It is only Christ, has the remedy to really get someone life being clean. Because, like, even myself, who, you know, um, yeah, yeah. Even me myself, you know, back in the island, I used to do my gangster stuff, right? Muffin, the shutter, you know, weed, going at the dance, you know, and do all of them stuff. I've been there and I've done. When Christ came in, because it's all about the renewing of the mind and, you know, the cleansing. When Christ came in, he cleaned me up, totally clean. Now, one of the long-term problems that we are faced, you know, with the violence is when you have grandpa who's a gangster. Grandpa is teaching his son to become a gangster and teaching his grandchildren to become a gangster. So it begins in the home many of the times. They said it takes a village to raise a child. But how is the people think of the future of the child? It is hard. Like my father, when I started smoking weed, he used to spunk me. And don't smoke. But then he sent me to buy the tobacco for him to smoke. So if I'm at home and I have my ratatata, my T9, and I'm coming home, how am I gonna tell my daughter don't M16? Or tell my son, you know, keep your pants up when my pants is falling down. So our children, we have to be that example. Because if I'm drinking the rugger stuff, kids in the village cannot say, I'm doing what you do. So
Okay. The moral here is that we should be the examples for the children, and we should be teaching them how to act at home. So when they go out there, I'm really happy that tonight we have a lot of men in the audience. Normally we don't have a lot of men, but tonight is special because one of the things that with hate crimes and human rights in our community is that our men don't know their rights. They are usually entangled in things and don't know how to get themselves out. They end up saying the wrong things and getting, getting charges on them. One of the things that we do with Children for Change is try to get young people to engage with the police. I remember growing up, I wasn't a thug like Pastor Terry, but I remember having friends and cousins who would literally say, "Yo, we hate the police for no reason," and when you would ask like, why, it was an automatic thing because there was a lot going on. Then they knew that they would be stick-ups and whatever. So in our communities, it's important that our people know their rights. They know that how to defend themselves with the rights that are given to them, and who can, where can they get the information, where can they get the support that they need so that they don't have to act out on their own emotions, but know that services are there for them, ready to be provided to ensure that they are safe. So we learned that there, a lot of hate crimes happen in our community, but hardly reported. whatever's being reported is not enough, because we know that hate crimes happen every day in our community. People are being discriminated, people are being harassed, threatened day on and day out, but our community's not reporting. How can we get our young people, our young men, our adult men to really report hate crimes in the community, and where can they go to get the resources so that they can save themselves from being entangled in bigger situations that are unnecessary?
So I think the crucial starting point to answer this question is to understand what the city defines as discrimination, okay? Because our agency can only take cases that fit that description of what discrimination or harassment is in New York City. So this is how the city defines it. It's unfair or unequal treatment to a person or a group of people based on their protected class. So the protected classes are the things I mentioned earlier: race, age, disability, ethnicity, the language you speak, your nationality. It can be things you're born with, or it can be things you're not born with. Let me give you a good example of a protected class that none of us are born with. A housing voucher, okay? Having Section 8, having city FEPs, that is a protected class. You cannot be discriminated against when you have a housing voucher when you're looking for an apartment. So if that's the kind of experience that people are having, they can come to us for help, for legal services. They can come to the city, the Commission on Human Rights, okay? So you have to start there. Does what I'm experiencing or what I'm seeing on the street in my communities, does it fit that description of unfair or unequal treatment of a person or a group based on a protected class? By the way, everything I'm saying on here is on our website, nyc.gov/human rights, right? You can see all of this on there in a lot of different languages, right? So that information is there. So when you start there, then you know automatic. I can bring a case to the commission, to the city, or maybe this doesn't fit this. Maybe this is about a personal conflict that I myself or a group of my friends or something are having with another group. That's a different situation, that there are probably other city agencies, whether it be certain programs within the NYPD or other community organizations outside of the city that help with those kind of more complex social conflicts that we might be seeing in communities. But I do want to be clear that if anyone is facing like harassment on the street or disrespect, discrimination on the street, or when they're like going into certain stores or certain communities because of a protected class, that is something that can come to us. But we deal with a lot of other kinds of discrimination as well. Primarily when you're looking for work, you should not be getting discriminated against. And when you're looking for an apartment, or any kind of housing in New York City, that's what our law is built for. It's to prevent discrimination in those areas as well. So I'll leave it there.
And the question, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
How can our community, where the service is provided so that our young men, our men in our community do not get entangled in situations where they feel helpless, where they're acting by emotion, but they can rely and know that they have, the city has services that are ready to support and to help them.
Thank you. So just to add on what Orlando was saying, one of the ways is, so the information is present, but now you've got to be able to access it in a language that you can understand. So being able to have language access, which the city does for various languages, right? So it's just about finding partners in community that speak a specific language, that understand the movements of the community to share that information. But if there is a discrimination case that somebody has a concern about, they should definitely go to the Commission of Human Rights and share. They should not be fearful of the fact that they may not speak English, because there are resources in Haitian Creole, in Urdu, for example, in Spanish. I mean, whatever language it is, there are folks on the city side that can provide the information in a language that they understand so they feel comfortable getting that information. I think the other item here is fear. Many of our immigrant populations have concerns about deportation or having somebody come after them if they file a discrimination suit, and they are concerned about somebody coming after either them or their family. Discrimination. No matter what, they should move forward with reaching out to the city and speaking about their discrimination concerns, because there are folks there that are willing to provide them with the resources that they need. The other item I would say is that folks are afraid of government, right? So if you're going to have a resource and the government, the city provides a vast range of resources, ranging from everything that you could imagine. But because the city represents the government, folks don't want to really approach the city. And so this is where credible messengers can definitely help. If there are community organizations that we can partner with to provide the resource, we can provide the resource, they can provide the education. We love to partner, and we love to partner. We're already partnering with a lot of organizations. I'm sure CCHR can speak to that as well. I'm not putting you guys on the spot, but I mean, we have partners with CBOs all the time, right? So if there's a community-based organization that has not partnered yet with the city, we'd love to hear from you, work with you, see how we can partner so that you can serve as a credible messenger on your block, in your neighborhood, in your community, so that there's not one person left without getting the resource, right? There's services for everyone. And so if there is information that you all need, please go to the mayor's office website. You can go through and find every city agency there. If you have a concern, I would start with 311. If you're not tech savvy, just dial 311. Let them know what you have concerns about, and the 311 operating team will connect you with a city agency to get you the service that you need.
Thank you.
Well, based upon my experience with that, fear is one, and the second thing is a lot of immigrants would not go to the city or the federal for assistance. One of the reason, because there's a part of the law that dictate that if you are undocumented and you are a burden to the country, you're getting any form of assistance, like housing or food stamps, that could find you disqualified to become a permanent resident, to get a green card. So a lot of people, and I even observed that, even go back to 9/11, back then, when they said that people start to get sick, and they start to say, okay, you can go and get checked up. They investigate to see if you have social security number, even though we were there at ground zero, and during Hurricane Sandy, and a lot of disaster that happened. So when people go out, right, and they see the sign that said FEMA, Homeland Security, many immigrants, they don't know the difference between immigration and FEMA. So as long as they see Homeland Security, they backed out. Even in the school today, there's a lot of parents who would not sign put their name on paper for their kids to get help in the school because of fear. So that is one of, well, things change around a little bit now. So, but those are some of the fear factor that is in place. Unless people understand it clearly that, it's okay. You can go and get help. And
Okay.
even with your organization, a lot of immigrants would not come for help. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. And one of the things we just want to tell everyone, we say this all the time, anytime we're at a community event, Commission on Human Rights will never, ever ask for anyone's immigration status in any conversation. It's not on a form. It's not a question we're allowed to ask. And I believe that extends to all city workers. Really, we shouldn't be asking anyone about their immigration status at all whatsoever. It's irrelevant to the services that you can access when you live in New York City. So I just want to put that out there.
Okay. Thank you. So I know that fear is one of the major things that everyone has included in their answers tonight. And fear causes a lot of damage. So I think, I believe that fear is one of the things we should be working on in our communities to break the fear, you know, where we can have people have enough confidence not to react without thinking. Because as we say, fear, you know, the Bible says God doesn't give us a spirit of fear. And when you are afraid, we tend to act out of, you know, what we were taught, how our parents trained us, the things we say. And so tonight, with all of these things being said, I know that we're going back to 9/11. Although all of these things happened, I feel that, Pastor Terry, you didn't have much fear going into Ground Zero. And according to our, from the documents that I've read, there are more than 400,000 survivors, first responders, rescue recovery workers, cleaning crew that worked in Lower Manhattan, that have been affected by 9/11, causing tens of thousands of people suffering from chronic illnesses, mental health issues, and even cancer. So during 9/11, when you were at Ground Zero, and it says that there has been more than 2,000 that died who were exposed afterwards. As a volunteer at such an event, did you think of the future circumstances that would happen after 9/11? If you thought of it before and you thought it would have affected your health, would you have gone in there?
Well, certainly, if it was told that, hey, if you go down to Ground Zero, you're gonna die, you know, well, even the officers would think about it, right? But certainly we have responded to, you know, other, you know, crises where we put our life on the line. We never stop. You know, 22 years later, you know, there's a lot of other conflict and crisis that happen, and we're still out there. But if there is a fear that I think that I would have for the people, is the fear of the people who have been affected and have been pushed to the side and don't know that their illness is related to Ground Zero, to 9/11, and they don't know who to go to, where to go, and, you know, that is one of the biggest fear that is out there, because people now just all they know, oh, I have cancer, oh, I have this illness, I have that illness, and a lot of illness related to Ground Zero. But then again, if you're not firefighter or law enforcement, maybe the federal or the city, they doesn't highlight that. you know, if you're a volunteer, if you're a pastor, if you're a youth organization, and you're just going out there as a civilians, or now they're fighting for people who are resident, you know. But even for you to prove that. Remember, it's federal, so they're going to do a lot of investigation. They're going to dig up your background. It's not just going to be a 1, 2, 3 thing, right? To get in it. So we pray that, that these fear, and even you talk about the fear, and then I'm going to stop. Even the police officers are here. A lot of people who are victim or witness of a crime, and sometimes they don't want to say anything to the police, or because they are fearful of their life, because they said, oh man, maybe if I tell the police or I go out and tell my neighbor what I see, somebody gonna come back and get me and think I'm snitching. So there's a lot of fear out there, and we have to do some work in that area, and that's what like Mr. Waterman is doing, and the God Squad Elite Learners, and certainly the mayor has been really working hard to come up with different type of programming that can engage us with resources and information, and so that we can go out to the community to bridge that divide, and like what you are doing, Pastor Lizette, you're doing a fantastic job, and I would ask everybody, put your hand together for her. She's Children for Change. Amen. You have been championing the cause, and it is not easy to get police and these great men, and leaders together, in a rainy day like this. So I commend you. You're awesome.
Well, unfortunately, when fortunately in some cases, when this community is traumatized, or there is a catastrophic event such as 9/11, people tend to rally to come together. We've seen it in every situation throughout the country, throughout the world. It's the human side of the equation. So all the divides that we talked about a little earlier, the biases that exist, that comes through, a cultural push, lack of knowledge, inaccurate information that is oftentimes being peddled and pushed. You mentioned even, being called names, or something being attached to one particular group or another as a result of, again, people just lacking the information necessary. But fear is the driving force of people acting. And so, specific to 9/11, people acted. They ran down to the site, to Ground Zero, because for different reasons, but it was all, fear was always there. I don't think anybody was there going, I'm fearless or fear-free of the situation. I think it's just the driving factors differed from person to person. Somebody either had a family member down there, knew somebody who could potentially be down there. The thought that, what if I was down there and I was trapped and I needed help? And then all it took was a few more hands to move some more rubble or to move some things. So all of those things, I think, are relevant and factor in. The work we do, I don't think anybody here can sit up here and go, I'm fearless in the work that we do. I am just more fearful of if we're not doing it, right? Like, I don't think any police officer goes out there going, I'm not worried, everything is safe, I got a badge and a gun and I'm good too. I'm better off than anybody else. I don't think that's the case. I do believe that there is a comfortability in the work that they do. I think the training kicks in a lot of the things that we do to help us a little bit more comfortable in those spaces. And I think culturally, us being able to have conversations with our community members one-on-one, have the relationship and establish those relationships is what allows us to limit how fear may have an impact on what we do in our engagement. But at the end of the day, I fear if we're not doing this work on the ground, whether it be pastoratorily, from a clergy standpoint, or Tyron on the, as a community organizer, as I say, a youth advocate. He can sing, by the way. They mentioned that in his bio, but he was a little bashful about that. But he can sing. But I know that because I've seen it and seen it out in our engagement, right? Again, community is so. I think that will reduce fear. We engage. I see. Is it Detective Joseph now? Officer Joseph. I don't know. I'm already, giving him an upgrade there. But yeah. But we've engaged with the precinct, in positive ways, and then taking that model and put it out into the community. So you reduce the fear maybe of that youth or young men and or young ladies are having with their engagement with the police. Police have our community has been scarred with traumatic situations by the hands of the police. That's a fact. That's not me saying anything. I'm not for or against it. It's just that's a fact. And so in order to reduce that, you have to have those engagements that are positive. It's a simple mathematical equation. The more positive you have, the more positive you're going to get. The more negative you have, the more negative you're going to get. It's really simple. And that's in everything we can probably attach to in our lives. And so we just need to continue to model those things. That will reduce the hate. Have conversations with our youth. Get our youth involved in the conversation and hear what they're thinking, saying, believing, and be able to dialogue in a way that reduces hate, reduces fear, provides information that is accurate, making us a more knowledgeable community, and invoking the idea and the mindset and the mantra of community. I think in Tyron's bio, what did he say? You can't have unity without community or community without unity. And if you don't have that, what's going to end up happening is everybody lives in their four walls, right? Whatever it is in your home and whatever that culture it is in that house. It's not wrong, what you're teaching in your home, not necessarily wrong, but it's not necessarily one that is benefit to everybody else and outside of those walls. And so one of the things the reason why we started East Flatbush Village was because I had 4 children. The best way that I could pour into my children is to make sure that the people they were going to engage were well off. The people they were going to engage had information and knowledge. The people they were going to engage had resources. The people they were going to engage were going to be safe and pour back into them. And it's a cycle that works with. We can't live in a community and my household is good and go, I ain't got to worry about it. My kids are good because I did everything I could do for my kids. Well, I would challenge everybody that if you're doing for your kids, that's great. Do that. It starts there. But you also have to work within your community outside of your home to make sure that those that are going to impact your community and in your children are also getting those resources. I was able to do this, and I'll end on this point. Over 18 years, I coached football. One of the things I used to do, football was the carrot. I coached football. I coached girls in indoor and outdoor track and field. I've coached many sports. Football was the carrot at the time. And I was in front of young men who were interested in football. But I was mentoring them. We were guiding them. And we have relationships now with those young men beyond football. We only spent 4 years with them in football, but a lifetime of connection, of community through the mentorship that came with that. And so we were pouring into them to make sure that they could then turn around and pour back into their community. And that was the idea. And so I challenge everybody to come with that mindset. That yes, make sure your kids are good, but the best way to also make sure your kids are good is to make sure the community that they are going to be interacting in are good and well-rounded as well. And that way you have a safer and a more knowledgeable and fearless community.
Thank you for stating that. I find that one of the most, I was finished with my questions, but just backing up what you said, one thing in our community, I can say coming from the immigrants or Haitian community, is one of the things that parents don't really want their kids to really engage because they have this thing that they don't want their kids to mingle and get into bad things. So they shelter them and keep them at home, and they're not engaged in the community at all. And so I believe that with that coming from you is just reassuring that our parents, the parents, you have to allow your children to come to events like this, to engage in the community, to give to their services into the community that they live, so that in the future, they're not afraid of that community that they grew up in. So it's not just that our children just going to church and going home, but it's also them going into the activities in the community, going to the park and playing, going to a local precinct to meet their local precinct, going to the store. I believe there was a young man that was killed in the Bronx. The people at the store didn't help him out. Going to the store, introducing your child to that grocery store guy. Hey, this is my child. Hi, how are you doing? Teaching our children to say good morning and good afternoon in their communities. I remember just last year, my niece came into the United States coming from Haiti, and she would greet people when she see them walking down the street. And that's something that, they teach in our culture. So people were actually looking like, oh my God, did she just say hi? People were actually shocked that children said hi. So these are things that I believe that needs to come back into our communities, the things that our grandmothers, our grandparents, thought they needs to come back. We can't allow our children to be to learn only from social media with a tablet, a telephone, and that's all that they're learning. So
Can I add one thing to that? So social media technology is a great thing, but when you go back to the time in which you said your grandparents or whatever, they taught those things because that was the only way to engage. Now you're isolated technically with technology. Mm-hmm. You can kind of stay in a little, put blinders on with regards to that. And I'm not saying that even though generationally we attribute it to the youth, but we do it as adults. Yes. I've probably learned more in my adulthood, of course, than I did in my adolescence. And that's probably true of most adults. It's just a matter of the foundation that you usually are built on. So most people know good morning, good afternoon, good night, and do all those things. But we get isolated and we kind of put ourselves in that space. And of course, all the other things we just talked about in terms of fear. So yeah, it's a wonderful point. We founded East Flatbush Village from the idea also that everybody needs to get exposed to different things. You talked about, besides going to church and going to school, that they also be involved in other recreational activities and travel and all those things. When those opportunities come, you're going to meet different people who don't look like you. You're going to meet different people who have a different upbringing and culture than you do. That reduces fear and, in turn, the hate, because you're increasing the knowledge that you have of your community and people. So I just want to make sure that that's something that we are also pushing on regularly.
All right, and I just want to add, just piggyback off both of what you guys said, as far as Pastor Lewis said too. She said, well, the youth got to continue to come out to these events like that. And I personally do agree, but this is where I would like to commend everybody, as far as Pastor Lewis said, Eric, I forgot the brother's name, but from the city, Orlando, Pastor Terry and David, from the city office to the community-based organizations. And I would like to say that they do have to continue to come to these events, but we got to continue to show up for them. We got to continue to stay consistent out here and continue to have these type of events so that way they can come to the event. And I believe the more we continue to stay on ground and have the events, the change is going to come. The change is going to come.
Pastor Weir, as Mr. Waterman mentioned too, that a lot of people was traumatized by the police, after all the things that happened. But certainly I would agreed also with that. But the police that we have 20 years ago, it's a different police department today in 2020, so yeah. Unfortunately, and it's a human thing, right? People may heard of some people in Haiti or Jamaica do something that is not right, so they think all Jamaicans are bad, right? All people from Haiti is bad, but police officer who used to do bad things back then, a lot of them retire. They gone off the job, right? And now we have a fresh breath of police officer who are police officer who live in our community, who are members of the community, who are members of our church, right? So they walk on the block. They live in the block, so they go to the corner store on the block after they take off the uniform. So because of that, it gives them a little more better sense of want to engage more and protect the community. And also, back then there used to be a blue wall. They used to talk about the blue wall, right, where there was no kind of a community engagement like we have now. Back then we couldn't just walk into the precinct, and there was no NCO back then. There was no neighborhood coordinating officers. The community affairs, they used to be there back in the days, but it wasn't like open like we have now. We can just, like you and I, we know the inspector telephone number direct now. Back in the days, you couldn't get the inspector because there's a protocol we have to go through, right? Protocol is still there, but now we, like Officer Joseph here, you can call him anytime. I call him sometime when he's sleeping, and yeah, right. Back then you couldn't call a cop when they're sleeping, man. A cop wouldn't even give you. Other matter of fact, back then they didn't have a telephone number to give you, right? But we come a long way. And put your hand together for the NYPD and great leaders like you. And we really, thank you guys for the great work you're doing. And certainly the mayor has really, set the tone so the officers are doing the right thing and getting back to the way the NYPD, should be. And I pray that the rest of the world would copy and learn from the NYPD, so thank you guys.
Okay, I don't know if anyone in the audience have any questions or any questions in regards to the topics.
I have a question. My question is this. I know I'm not originally from New York, but when I came here some years ago, the that phrase credible messenger was like a big thing. I actually worked with God Squad at one point in time, and I used to hear this often. Can you give a definition of what an effective credible messenger is in the streets, or somebody who is on the block? What is an effective credible messenger?
An effective, got all my words all tangled up again. An effective, credible messenger is somebody who's a community stakeholder, somebody who has, links and ties to said community, can relate to not necessarily the demographic, because I don't want to make it barrier it, but can understand culturally the dynamics in the neighborhood or the said group or individuals that they're working with. The stakeholder piece is probably the biggest part to it. When credible messages through the Cure Violence model was said that because they were working with those that were justice involved, that you had to then be justice involved. At least that was the assumption or presumption. But that's actually couldn't be further from the truth, right? Like, it's somebody who has trust within that community, somebody who's willing, who you are able to have a connection and a tie with and to, whether that means you were justice involved or not. Somebody who can have a conversations with, from the child all the way up to the grandparents, all the way, and everybody in between. But also be out and go from corner to corner, store to store, block to block, the youth, whether they be gang involved or setting aside or not having that fear to engage your own people. So that is the, I guess, broader version in chopped up ways of what, a credible messenger is. It's not one, box that anybody can fit in. If I go from another neighborhood, a credible messenger that might not look like what I'm presenting as a credible messenger, but it's credible to those people on the ground. And so it's very important to understand that dynamic, in particular when doing this work of community engagement. I don't want to only just say gang and gun violence prevention, but definitely about community engagement. Credible messenger, your credible messenger could be the guy at the corner store. The credible messenger could actually be your community affairs officer, because it might have the relationship with the people in the community. It has no real like one size fits all. They tried to do that, and I think it harmed the overall message of a credible messenger. But it's broader than that. All right.
Also too, like, credible messenger is one who, does not have the desire to build walls, but to build bridges. Because walls divided, cities, but bridge, connect cities. And, consistency, credible messenger are consistent in what they do. They are not afraid. They don't go out there and sprinkle gasoline and fire. Even, with what we do, I'm not saying that we're not good, but even when there's a conflict, when the police is at fault, and we know that they're at fault, but we still don't go out there to stone the entire police department because of the fault of a few. It's the same thing. Like a firefighter may do, set some fire, right? Just to, get them going to out fire, right? Or a few doctor may do malpractice, right? But then we don't go against the entirely, Department of Health because a few doctor do malpractice. Somebody in the military may go out and just do something that, make the world wonder. That's really the job of a soldier, to go out and create such a massacre. But we don't go out and speak against the entirely, military in the world. There are soldiers who are still out there that are credible, that are still doing their due diligence, still carrying out their duty with dignity and pride. And as I said, with us as messenger of change, we don't go out and speak hate. We speak love. We don't speak war. We speak peace. We don't speak, division. We speak unity. And if you speak those words, I think you're fall in the category of credible messenger.
Okay. Anyone else have a question in the audience? No questions. So I think I did a good job. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so we have a question? Okay, hi Eve.
speak on the first piece that you talked about in terms of, so you don't have to be perfect to do this work, right? Like, we're not looking for people to get involved and be engaged and be perfect to start to solve a problem. And what that also, to answer your question, I know you understand that, but to the larger masses, I want people to understand that. Like, if we're seeking perfection, we'll never get it. I'm not perfect. Nobody up here, I believe, is perfect or would self-describe themselves as perfect. But the idea is that we are trying to make sure we're pouring that positive and the right energy into our community. Specific to hate crimes, you saying just people that's not of our community. I mean, people will, if there's going to be a hate crime, somebody's going to come from outside the community. Most of the community tends to look alike or be from the same cultural type background. From time to time, it may vary. There's a little bit more diversity dependent. But I know right here in Flatbush, usually it's about the same in terms of the culture. Yes.
I was saying, like, if we really care about the community, we'll cut the dependency that we have on others. So,
When you say dependency, elaborate.
job, food, market,
Right.
anything like to survive against somebody else.
Right.
And, okay.
So I agree with you. I was born and raised here in East Flatbush. I remember when there were very little stores in many of the areas. Now there's almost an oversaturation of stores, gas stations, you name it. Everywhere you go, there's something. But I also remember mom and pop stores used to look stores that people who looked like us, or they were Jewish background, because it was a community that was kind of like, we were the rising community, immigrant culture that was coming in and replacing that Jewish culture community that existed here. So it was either that, mom and pop stores, and or another culture that might have been, had different shops or you name it. And the point that I'm making with that is that there needs to be more opportunity and resources for us to be able to start our own shops, our own stores, have our own entities. To go back to the point of reducing hate, if we don't own anything, if we don't operate anything, if we can't see ourselves doing any of the things that we see others doing, it's going to be the problem with hate is people have this self-hate, and then it gets projected out on us by people. So to have those lack of resources perpetuates that. And so to answer your question, so what I want to say to that is we do need a lot more of those things in our community. And those are some of the things that we work on in my organization to make sure we have more resources and people have the opportunity for upward mobility and to be able to access entrepreneurial opportunities. That I'm actually going to have tomorrow at our office at 1011 Utica Avenue for those working with the DA's office, for those that are justice involved, whether they were justice involved or not, they can participate. But the target is for that, from 1 to 3, specifically for those to have entrepreneurial opportunities and workforce development.
Involved. No. I'm good. No.
So what you're talking about is a credible messenger, right? That's somebody who's from the community, of the community, making sure that the community has the things that they need. Right. No, We can help each other, but David's going to answer. I know he had a thing, and then I want to touch on the point you made, but a wonderful point. Okay, so you're making a wonderful point. It's very valid. We have everything we need right now to do everything you just talked about. It's right here in this room, and it ain't got anything to do with anybody who's up here on this panel. So what we need to do is just make sure that there's a follow through and an execution to those things, right? So whether that be, whatever entity it is you want to create, we're sitting in a place that I think is, or at least operated, right, by African American and or Caribbean descent, what have you. And so we can do those things. We just need to, one, it's happening. I want to say that it's happening. It's happening in this community. It's happening in other communities. Is it being showcased? That's one thing. Is it being broadcast? That's another thing. Is it being advertised? That's another thing. Is it happening at the pace and the clip that it should? No. So you're right. But what I would say is that we do need stakeholdership and credible messages in all spaces. So while I work up here to prevent gun violence and do community organizing, we do credible messages in the space of workforce development, of entrepreneurial dynamics. I want to touch on a point you made about community centers. I worked vigorously to make sure there was a community center in our community. I knew there was a void that was missing, and we worked very hard. We finally got a community center. It's now being built. That's a great thing. I don't want to, for the sake of this forum, go into the challenges that now of what took place that is now going to add challenges to that project. But we have community centers that already exist. They call them schools, wonderful buildings that have all the facilities necessary for us to be able to have our kids go in there. I'm not talking about 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm talking about the community at large being able to utilize the facility in all the different schools that we have. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're thinking about the academic component. I'm talking about community stakeholders like yourself. I would bring you in. We would sit down. We would talk. I would say, what's your name? Sorry. Eve? Oh, Eve. Okay. So I would say to you, what's your experience? What's your dynamic you're coming from? And you would tell me. And then what we would do is sit down, work with the mayor's office, or work with, it doesn't even have to be a city agency. I would do that because I'm a partner person. I'm going to work with God Squad. I'm going to work with Pastor Terry Lee. I'm going to come to the Reverend and say, listen, we let's work together. Let's bring you to the table. And then you speak to our youth and or community members at large, and we put together a workshop to do that. So that's some of the ways in which we're already doing that, right? I've worked with everybody up here on the panel except for Orlando, right? Except for Orlando because I just met him today. But I'm going to work with him after today. And so my point is, you and individuals like yourself to be able to do that and have those discussions. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's going to happen as a collective. And I think it's necessary for us to be able to have these engagements, ask those questions, and then the key is actionable. Like after we leave these doors, it's not about what we do now, it's about what we're going to go out there and do. So like I would challenge you and charge you with that, is to say, let's follow up and let's have a conversation to be able to have that implementation of exactly what you're talking about.
It took many years to teach that hatred that we're doing, right? So how come we don't have a young class that will teach the youth self-acceptance, self-love, and community acceptance, and just simple acceptance and love?
It's happening as well. We have different spots of that. I know God Squad has Flatbush Leadership Academy, and you can talk about that. I know Ty talk about that. No, it's not in a. It's not in.
It's a mentorship program for youth.
We got the schools, we got the fellow brothers that couldn't do it, that hate on you. You got the grandmas like in Goodwill that's hating. There's no little thing that comes in and say, hey brother, I care about you. You know what you're gonna do it. Come here, let me teach you how to do it. You're gonna do it. You know what, you'll stop. We don't hear none of that. You hear how you're no good, you this, or you're gonna be like this, or you know this, and it's in different places. And there is not one place for 1 hour that your kids can go to and actually be like, man, I'm
And Eve, just to wrap it up real quick, I just want to say one more thing, right? I respect everything that you said, and this is why this young brother is sitting on the panel with them now. And we could definitely talk after this, so that way we could get tuned in and we could situate whatever you got going on, all right? Got you, brother.
And my final thing, and also, General, even the police, they have a lot of resources.
We're gonna connect with you offline, brother. I think that's the best way to do this. I think having this back and forth now is not productive. We will definitely connect with you offline and make sure that you're in tune with all the resources that either the nonprofits here are offering or the city can provide.
Yes. Thank you so very much. This was a wonderful conversation. I have to definitely extend a shout out. Let me say a shout out, and like we do in Brooklyn, to the 7-0 precinct. Officer Joseph is one that is here for our community. If you live in this area and you're having any issues in your community, feel free. He has his card. You can call him direct and speak to him. We have some other people in the community that are working that are not actually nonprofits, but are in the community that really cares about our community. We have Max U Barbershop. he collaborates with us, ensuring that this year we had a group during our back to school program. His barbershop is right there. He opened his doors and was doing haircuts. These are the things that we need in the community, telling our youth that they're loved. And what Eve is talking about, I believe he's talking about other people coming from other places getting the money, and us in that, when we say of his complexion, we're not doing the work. And this is what we're here for. This is why we started this. Because growing up, there are resources like the Flatbush Academy. I wish when I was growing up, I had the Flatbush Academy. And this is one of the programs that God Squad has. East Flatbush Village has a great program for young people that are working. I think they hired young people, over 60 kids this summer. The God Squad hired over 100 kids. They're doing a lot of things, making them travel, getting them into the mayor's office. We're not doing little things. We need the community now to acknowledge what we are trying to do to support the work that we are doing, so that our faces can be shown up. Because if you're not supporting the work we're doing, and if you're not showing up, like you said, we don't get the funding to continue what we're doing. So when our community gets together, it's when something bad happens. When someone got beat up by an officer, when somebody got shot, when somebody's dead. A child, I remember I started Children for Change after that boy on Nostrand Avenue got hit on the head for $1, being bullied at school. And bullying, I went through bullying. So, but until something bad happens, we don't do nothing. So when we take the tragedies to change things, we need the community to support us. I want to say a special thank you to Pastor Franklin Wilson, who, supports me a lot. In these things, we need the people in the community to say, hey, you got to do this. Let's do this. This is what you can do. I can support you. Let me come in. I can put a hand in it. Annually, we have a power walk. This is going to be our third walk for anti-bullying. Last year, East Village Flatbush was with us. This year, I'm hoping Human Rights Office is with us. Pastor Terry Lee has been with us for 2 years. Last year, he wasn't with us. The mayor's office will be with us this year. So it takes time, but it takes hard work. But at the same time, if we have your support and your love, we will go far. We will go far, and our children will not be having the conversation or the questions that Eve is having. right? So thank you so very much. Tonight we have refreshments sponsored by Blue Line Fry Plantain, which is another restaurant that's sponsored to feed whoever came out tonight. So these are the things, this is how our community is supporting us. Our officer came here, he left his office, he's been standing on his feet because of this, just so that we know that the precinct, the police department is with us too. They want to see the change. So tonight, again, I want to say thank you to all of you for coming out. It's a rainy night. Thank you to Tololo, which is our greatest Haitian broadcast. I want to say thank you to our board of directors for Children for Change International. We wish to do more things in the future. We need your support. We need you to be there with us. There's more to come. We gotta have this conversation on the streets. We gotta have it at the barbershop. We gotta have this conversation at a local restaurant. We gotta have this conversation at a park. So, these things that I know God Squad, you guys do things at the park. We can't only just feed our community with food. We got to give them knowledge. We got to teach them that fear can never win. All right, so thank you. Children for Change International, my name is Reverend Lisette, better known as Princess Liz. God bless you. Please enjoy the refreshments. Have a wonderful night. Oh, and before you leave, we just want everyone to come come with us so we can have a group picture and we can share it with our panel. Thank you so very much for being here tonight. Photo first. Okay. So we're going to take a picture over here. Okay, guys, okay, you guys come this way. We have a track and field star in here, okay? Raise your hand.
I love you, I love you, I love you. Benny Swale Tanet. Benny Swale Tanet. Benny Swale Tanet. I love you, I love you, I love you. Benny Swale Tanet. Benny Swale Tanet. Benny Swale Tanet. You got me out here singing Benny Swale Tanet. Nothing goes beyond Calvary. You're my only smell. Your love is true. Your love is really kind. You became my king. Now everybody calls me princess. Jesus, yes, the name is my only success. Embedded in my soul. Your blood will never go cold. You won me once. You died for me once. And once I will live for you forever and more. I love you, I love you, I love you. Benny Swale Tanet. Benny Swale Tanet. Benny Swale should've never made it, but Christ changed the game and now I live it. From your job, the devil's a liar. Jesus took my place, the sacrifice is no longer required. I've been replaced, now I'm only living by